Okay, good afternoon, students. Today we are going to discuss the third lecture of fundamentals of plant breeding, and it is all about self-incompatibility and male sterility. So, very first we are going to discuss that is self-incompatibility. As the name itself is indicating, self and incompatibility. Self means something that is taking place within, that is said to be self, and incompatibility, that means something is not compatible. Say for example, say we are two friends, and if friends are not able to understand each other, then this is said to be incompatibility. And if they understand very nicely to each other, then it is said to be compatibility. So, compatibility is of two types: incompatibility and compatibility. In means there is no understanding among two. This self-incompatibility we will discuss in case of the plants. So before I discuss what is meant by the self-incompatibility, I would like to introduce you all with certain methods of mode of pollination. I will let you know the certain natural mechanism that actually affect the mode of pollination. As last time when we were studying about the mode of reproduction, there we came to know that there are certain methodologies which do not allow the pollination to take place in the crop plants. That was either the difference in maturation of the two reproductive units or anything. But out of the out of all those all factors, we are going to study in detail self-incompatibility and male sterility, and these two are the natural mechanism that actually affect the mode of pollination. We are going to study only these two among many methods, because this method is significant as it is utilized in the use of hybrid seed production. Now, self-incompatibility. The term self-incompatibility, it was given by, this term was given by Stout in 1970, and for the very first time it was reported by the scientist named as Carl Reuter, and in the species that is said to be Vervescum phonicum in the 18th century. This self-incompatibility is abbreviated as SI, and if we talk about its definition, then it is defined as the prevention of fusion. That means it is not allowing the fusion to take place. Fusion of what? Fusion of fertile male, that means functional pollen grains, and female gamete after self-pollination. Like, and now you all are much familiar with the self-pollination, where pollen grains of one flower are fusing with egg of a female part. Now what is happening out? This fusion is prevented within the flower. Why this fusion is prevented? This is only said to be self-incompatibility. That means it is defined as the prevention of, although pollen grains and egg apparatus that is near to each other, but self-incompatibility is the mechanism that is not allowing the pollen grains and eggs to fertilize with each other. So in case of self-incompatibility, these pollen grains are failing to germinate. What happens actually in self-compatibility? We will be discussing the two cases, like why there is no fertilization taking place. Very first case can be pollen grains which are produced from the microspores. These pollen grains germinate. Very important it is. What happens in the self-incompatibility? In the self-incompatibility, pollen grains germinate. This is pollen This is pollen grain. This pollen grain germinate, but after the germination, what happens? Pollen grain used to form a pollen tube. This pollen grain is germinating, that is good, but this pollen tube is no more capable of entering into the stigma. That means there is a certain barrier that is preventing the fusion of two. This is the one case, like why self-incompatibility takes place. Now we will discuss another case. Another case is pollen grain is germinating and pollen tube. Earlier pollen tube was not capable of entering the stigma. Now pollen tube is capable of entering the stigma and it reaches the style. But the growth of pollen tube is so slow that while the time it reaches the egg, flower drops. That means there is no more presence of the flower, right? So this is also the reason behind the self incompatibility. So we discussed the two cases why self incompatibility is taking place. Then we said in many cases pollen grain is germinating but pollen tube is not capable of entering into the stigma. And if pollen tube is capable of entering into the stigma, then the penetration is so slow that while the time it reaches the egg or it reaches the ovule, at that particular time, before that particular timings, flower drops. And if flower is dropping, then there won't be progress of any process that is taking place within the flower. But now on the basis of interaction, that means some interaction is taking place between the pollen grain and pistil, that is not allowing the compatibility process to take place. So we will, on the basis of these interaction, see students, till now we discussed only two cases. One we said pollen grain, they do not enter, the style. They are not capable of entering into the style. Second case we discussed, pollen tube is there, but pollen tube now it is capable of entering into the style, but this process is very slow, and while the time it reaches the hair, flower drops. That means some interaction is taking place between the pollen grains and between the pistil. Now don't get confused with the pistil. Pistil is actually the female reproductive part that is consisting of three regions: stigma, style, and ovary. And ovary is the one that is having here ovule, and within the ovule is ovary. Okay, so this is the structure that is already clear. Now we will talk for the types of self incompatibility on the basis of interaction among these pollen grain and among this pistil. That is what parameters are actually regulating the self incompatibility. On that two basis we classify the self incompatibility into two categories. Very first is complementary and another one is oppositional. Now we will talk for the very first, that is a complementary system. This is very important, and kindly listen carefully. In complementary, that means something is complementary to each other. Another name for this complementary is stimulatory type of self-pollination. Very important. Here what is happening? This type is on the basis of interaction between the This is on the basis of interaction between the pollen grain and between the pistil. Now what happens in this complementary system? These two parts of the flower, they interact with each other, and as a result of interaction, they produce a substance, and the substance that is produced Very important, it stimulates the pollen germination, stimulates pollen germination, and it also stimulates the growth of pollen tube. That means we are talking about classification of self-incompatibility on the basis of interaction among pollen grain and pistil. And we said this complementary system is a kind of self-incompatibility where pollen grains and pistil interaction is a kind of that it produces the substances, and those substances are further stimulating. They are further stimulating the pollen germination and growth of the pollen tube because they are stimulating the growth. So this is the reason this complementary system is also said to be stimulatory type of self-pollination. But now very important thing, this pollen germination and growth of the pollen tube will only take place these pollen grains if these pollen grains they have the morphology that totally differs from the morphology of pistil. Very important. That means when this pollen germination and pollen tube growth will take place, it will take place only if the pollen grains they differ in this differ in self-incompatibility genotype from that of the pistil. That means if both are having different genotype, then only it is the interaction among the two is going to produce the substances which later on are going to result a pollen germination and going to result into the growth of pollen tube, right? But if pollen grain and pistil, if they are having same genotype, then in that particular case, there will be no pollen germination and there will be no growth of the pollen tube. And this example can be very strictly studied in species that is said to be dendrobium. This is about first case, that is complementary system that is said to be stimulatory. Stimulatory means that is stimulating the pollen germination and growth of the pollen tube. But it is possible only when both are having different genotype. This is complementary system. Now we will discuss the another system, that is oppositional system. In oppositional system, again, we are discussing this classification on the basis of interaction among pollen grains and among, among pollen grains and among pistil. So another name for this self-incompatibility is inhibitory type of self-incompatibility. That means in this substance, it is going to be opposite to that of the complementary. Here, pollen grains when are going to interact with the pistil, then the interaction is again going to release certain substances. Interaction is again going to release certain substances, but now in this case, these substances are preventing these substances are preventing very first. These substances are preventing pollen germination, and secondly, it will prevent growth of the pollen tube because the substances are involved in inhibitory action. So this is only the reason they are said to be inhibitory type of self incompatibility. Very important. But this inhibitory actor will be produced if pollen grains and pistil, the genotype of both is same. If the genotype is same, in the earlier cases we discussed, like in the complementary genotype is going to be different, but here genotype is going to be same. In the earlier complementary cases, substances were stimulating pollen germination and growth of the pollen tube. But here in case of inhibitory, because it is inhibitory, then inhibition is going to take place here. the substances that are produced as a result of interaction among the two, it is going to prevent the pollen germination and pollen tube formation. And when we discuss the cases, then almost all the self incompatibility cases are of oppositional system type only. So these are the two types that we discussed on the basis of interaction among say pollen grain and pistil, right? Now if we talk for we continue with the oppositional system, then here the genetic control is the genetic control of oppositional type is very simpler, because in the this is very simpler because in the genetic control we are discussing about the genotype of pistil and pollen grain, and since they resemble with each other, so going for the study of a genotype in this oppositional system is very simpler, rather than in case of complementary where genotype of both say pollen grains and of pollen grain and say of pistil, they are differing from each other. So with this we end with the classification, that is all on the basis of interaction among pistil and interaction among pollen grains. Now we talk about the concept of Lewis, and Lewis was a scientist who in the 1954, Lewis in 1954 further suggested the various another classification, and he said the classifications of self incompatibility is further of two types. Very first is said to be heteromorphic system and another is said to be homomorphic system. Out of these two, homomorphic system is further having two more classification. One, very first one is said to be gametophytic and another one is said to be sporophytic control. So one classification we read on the basis of interaction among the pollen grains and pistil, and the second classification that was given by the Lewis in 1954. On this particular, on the basis of this particular classification, we have self incompatibility of two types. Very first is heteromorphic and another is homomorphic. Now we are going to discuss the very first one, that is heteromorphic system. Hetero means different and morphic means morphology. So in this system, flowers of different incompatibility groups. See, we have one flower, we have another flower. So in this system, the flowers of different incompatibility. Different incompatibility means they are not, they are complementary to each other. Flowers which are having different incompatibility, they will also be different in terms of morphology. Very important. Hetero means different and morphic means morphology. So it is said that heteromorphic system is the system where flowers of different incompatibility, this say if this is the flower one and say this is the flower two, then flowers of different incompatibility, very important, the incompatibility is different from each other. Then in this system, the flowers of different incompatibility, they are different in morphology. If flowers are of different incompatibility, then how that incompatibility can be determined? That means this incompatibility, it can be determined by the genotype. This incompatibility can be determined by the genotype. Since the incompatibility is determined by the genotype, so this incompatibility system is also said to be heteromorphic sporophytic. Now, why it is said to be sporophytic? Because in this case, See, there usually used to be two things. One is pollen grain. When we talk for the spore, we will be talking for the pollen grain. Now, my motto here to let you know is why why here sporophytic term is used along with the heteromorphic. It is used because here, as I said, incompatibility is controlled by the genotype of the plant, the genotype of pollen grains, right? And this incompatibility is no more controlled by the flower that actually produced it. So this system is of little importance as it occurs in only a small number of the crop species, as in case of sweet potato and in case of buckwheat. So in heteromorphic system, as the name itself is indicating, that means in the heteromorphic system we are all in the heteromorphic system, we are all looking after the incompatibility, and that incompatibility, different incompatibility is also resulting into the different morphology. I will explain it better with the help of an example. Here we are talking for the two types of flowers. We are talking for the two kinds of flowers. Very first flower is said to be pin and another flower is said to be thrum. So very first flower is pin and the second flower is thrum. Now I will show you why self-incompatibility is different. Why different flowers of different incompatibilities, they are different in morphology also. So this is, we have considered two types of the flower, pin and thrum. Pin is the one, very important, these two flowers are produced on different plants. These two are produced onto the different plants. So we are talking for the two flowers, and the two flowers are these are originating onto the different plants. Now we will talk for the characteristics of the very first flower, that is pin. Pin are the kinds of flowers that is having long style and short stamens, while thrum are the flowers that is having short style but it is having long stamens. See from the diagrams, it is very clear, like in heteromorphic system, flowers of different incompatibility groups, they are different in morphology only. Compatibility of both these groups are different, and as a result their morphology is also different. Now we will talk for the genetic content. This situation is said to be distyly situation. Distyly because here in one flower styles are of smaller length, a style is of smaller length, and in another case style is of longer length. So it is said to be distyly. And you know this distyly condition is governed by a complex locus that is by the S. That complex locus is having S. See, if you could see here, here is small s and here is capital S small s, right? Now, complex locus is actually governing this diastyly nature. And you know, when S, when this S, when this S is producing the genotype capital S small s, if the genotype is capital S small s, then is the production of morphology which is said to be thrum. But if the genotype is small s, then the morphology is a sort of pin. Now the incompatible mating between pin and thumb. Now I will show you the compatibility crosses. Okay, this is I hope clear to all. I said in heteromorphic system, flowers of different incompatibility groups, they are also different in the morphology. And I told you one of the example I gave you of a flower that is having two morphology. One is pin and thumb. These two flowers are of different incompatibility, and as a result, their morphology is also different. This pin is the case where pin is the case where long style is there. This is the style that is long, and this is the stamens which are short. But in the other case, this style is short and the stamens are long, because style length is varying in both the cases. So we called it as a situation that is said to be distyly. Now why in one case style is long and why in the another case style is short, this in turn is controlled by a complex locus that is a small s. When we have capital S, small s, then the morphology is a sort of thumb. When we have small s, then the morphology is a kind of pin, right? Now, I will be discussing some of the crosses. The very first is what we talked about, the complex locus S. This complex locus S is proposed to have two alleles, because every gene is having alternative forms of the gene. So this S locus is also having two alleles. Very first one is capital S and another one is small s. So this S locus, which was called to be complex, it is further comprising of two alleles. One is capital S and another is small s. This capital S, because it is capital, so we can easily say this is dominant. This capital S is dominant over small s. Dominant over small s means wherever if in the combination the two alleles are present together, then it will not allow it to represent its feature. It will be allowing only its own feature to be represented. So this is said to be dominant and this is recessive. And whenever dominant and recessive alleles are present together, there is only the expression of dominant gene. In certain species, these two genes, they actually control the self incompatibility reaction, and this is the reason it is said to be heteromorphic sporophytic. Now what happens, we will talk for the pin flowers. The pin flowers are the one that is having S genotype. It is having S genotype, and it is having as genotype and as in incompatibility reaction. So see here there is a presence of only S genotype, right? But the pollen grains which are produced by the thumb, they will be having two types of genotypes. Very first is capital S and another one is small s. So here the pollen grains produced have this genotype, and here the pollen grains produced had this genotype. Now we are going to mate pin with the thumb, right? We are going to we are going to mate the two kinds of plants, that is pin and thumb. So see, when mating is to before mating is carried out, because here two are similar, so only one S is going to be produced, and all are going to be of S type only, that is small s. But here two are there, so here two gametes will be produced, when one will be capital S and another will be small s. But it is going to its expression, so all are going to be of capital S. Now we will carry four kinds of matings. Very first mating we will go for pin. We will go for where one pin flower is crossed with another pin flower. Then we will go for the another mating where one pin flower is going to be crossed with another thumb flower. Third, we will be going for the crossing or mating of opposite of this, where thumb, first of all we cross pin with pin, then we cross pin with the thumb. Now we will be considering thumb. Here thumb is crossed with pin, and in the last case thumb will be crossed with thumb itself. So these four matings we are going to discuss. When we are discussing for the mating, that is when we are discussing about the mating that is taking place between pin and thumb, that means this one, say pin or thumb, or say thumb or pin, this is the one thing only, right? Here pin is being crossed with the thumb, or say thumb is being crossed with pin, then this kind of mating is always going to produce, this is going to produce always it is going to produce two types of genotypes. Very first is SS, that is capital S and small s, and another is going to be small s, small s. And both quantity is in equal frequency. Both are being produced in equal frequency, right? So this is the one case. Now I will let you know how these two genotypes are being produced, because in the pin we had SS and then we had here capital S, small s. Since the two genotypes are of same type, so here we are going to have only one gamete. From here we are going to have only one, that is small s, and here we are going to have two, that is capital S and small s. So this will cross with this and this will cross with this. So we are going to have S, capital S and small s, one case, and in another case we are going to have small s and small s, right? So this is a heteromorphic sporophytic case where, because this when these two are present together, it is going to give rise, this is going to express itself, so all of them will be as phenotypically. This is clear, I hope this is clear to all. But when pin and pin is crossing with each other, that means one as from here and one as from here, this is incompatible mating, and this is also going to give incompatible mating. So the compatible mating is only going to be in between pin and thumb, or say among the thumb or pin. So with this I complete heteromorphic system of classification. The second that I am going to discuss is about homomorphic system. Homo means same morphology. Here in this system, incompatibility is no more associated with morphological differences. And the pollen grains, incompatibility reaction of pollen grains is controlled by the genotype of plant which are producing them. It is controlled by the genotype of the plant producing them, that is the sporophytic control, or the incompatibility is controlled by the genotype of pollen grain itself, that is said to be the gametophytic control. So this is said to be heteromorphic sporophytic. This is the case of heteromorphic sporophytic. This is the case of homomorphic sporophytic. As in the previous case, capital S, that is complex locus was controlling. Here we have single complex locus, and that is said to be capital S. There we had small s, and here we are going to have capital S. Complex locus is capital S, but in certain cases, more than one gene can be involved in case of homomorphic system. This more than one gene is said to be polygene. It is also called as modifying gene. This modifying gene is responsible this modifying gene is responsible in the ways that it will increase or decrease the activities of S allele. S allele both in the gametophytic as well as in case of sporophytic system. Here the style is having only S allele. That genotype is a kind of S1, S2, and here is S3, S4, right? If it is S1, S2, then it is going to give rise to S1 and S2, and it is going to give rise to S3 and S4 because both the gametes are different. This S1 is further. If this S1 is mated with S2, then the type of mating is going to be fully incompatible mating. This is the case where S1, S2, this S1, S2, if it is mated with S1, S2 only, that means this is one S1, S2. If it is allowed to mate with another S1, S2 only, then here this is the case of fully incompatible mating. But if these are the incompatible, that means no growth of the pollen tube is taking place. The second is a case where S1, S2, this S1, S2 is crossed with this S3. It is crossed with S1, S3. Then in this case, we are going to have partial incompatible matings. And fourth is the case where S1, S2 is allowed to mate with S3, S4. This is the case we are going to have fully compatible mating. So this is all about the morphological differences. In the very first case, heteromorphic system, we discussed about the small s. We discussed about the small s, and in the homomorphic system, because there are no morphological differences here, we discussed about the single locus s. This was further consisting of the genes this and this, but it is only consisting of capital only. And when we prepared a cross, or when we prepared the matings among different kinds, we came to know this one is the fully incompatible, this is partially incompatible, and this is fully compatible, right? Now we will talk for the fully compatible, where S1, S2 was allowed to cross with S2, S3. S1, we actually used to had how many types? S1, here the cross could be like, very first is S1 is crossing with S3. This is S1, S3. Then S2 is crossing with S3. That means S2, S3. Now S1 will cross with S4. That is S1, S4. And now S2 will cross with S4. That is this one. Where this is said to be monofactorial. That means S1, S2 is crossing with S3 once, and then it is crossing with the S4. This is said to be monofactorial gametophytic. But in the other case, now we will discuss another case. In this another case, we again had S1, S3. We are having now one is S1 and another we are having S3. This S1 and S3 is the one pair. This one pair is once allowed to cross with S2, S3 and then it will be allowed to cross with S2, S4. Right? So this is S2, S3 and this is S2, S4. Right? So these are the cases, or simply if I tell you just a minute, this can be more easily understood. We have S1, S2 that is crossed with S3, S4. This is the one mating cross. We can produce it into two parts. Two kinds of gametes are there, S1 and S2. And here we have the two crosses S3 and S4. Very first is the case where S1 and S2 will be allowed to cross with S3. In this case, what result we are going to have? Very first is S1 is crossing with S3. So we have S1, S3. Second is the case where S1 is S2 is the crossing with S3. So we had S2, S3. These two I hope are clear to all. Now is the case where S1 is now crossing with S4 and then S2 will be crossing with S4. When S1 is crossing with S4, then we have one S1, S4, this one. And when S1 is crossing with when S2 is crossing with S4, then we have S2, S4. This is said to be monofactorial gametophytic. That means monofactorial means this one factor is allowed to cross with another two. One factor is only crossing. This is the one scenario. Now we will talk for the another case. But here the gametes are different. Here we have here instead of S1, S2 and S3, S4, this is not the mating partners. Here the cross is like here S1 is once crossing with S3 and now S2 is also crossing with S3. That means first one same mating as in the first case we discussed is taking place. Now we will talk for this one. S1 is crossing with S4 and again S2 is crossing with S4. Here S1 is greater than S2 is greater than S3 is greater than X4. Here the compatibility of submitting is here fully compatible 50% are being synthesized and incompatible 50%. There is no half incompatibility product that is taking place, right? And in this case, there is no interaction among these, right? And here in the last case we have sporophytic, again 4 products will be same, but fully compatible are only 25 and incompatible are 75. That means this is compatibility relationship of SIP matings among the plants which are obtained from a fully compatible mating, right? So these are the examples of self incompatibility where we have discussed one heteromorphic system and another homomorphic system. So this is homomorphic system that is having two kinds, monofactorial and bifactorial. And in the sporophytic system, Lewis actually gave these concept, like he said, characteristics of this system. There are frequent reciprocal differences because one is reacting with another, another is reacting with yet another. So there are frequent reciprocal differences are there, and incompatibility can occur with the female parent only. Homozygoticity is the normal feature, and family can consist of three incompatible groups. And a self-incompatibility group is further consisting of two kinds of different genotypes. So this is what about self-incompatibility, where we said functional pollen grains are not capable of they are not capable of fusing with they are not capable of using, or they are not capable to set the seed. This is all about self incompatibility. Now I will be discussing the another topic, that is male sterility. Male sterility is, there we said pollen grains are at present but they are not functional, but here pollen grains, the pollen grains which are present, they are pollen grains are no more present. That means it is the result of absence of functional pollen grains. These are not common in natural population. Normally we used to have the presence of pollen grains, and it is very important in terms of experiments where we need to go for the production of hybrid seed. It is of two types. Very first is genetic and another is cytoplasmic. This is also known as cytoplasmic genetic kind of sterility when restorer genes are known. Male sterility was very first time it was reported by Colruyter in 1767, and he said pollen grains are non-functional, as a result of which there is no ability of or no ability for the seed set to take place. This is the broad classification of male sterility, where it is further differentiated into four categories. Very first is the genetic, then cytoplasmic, male sterility, that is abbreviated as CMS. Then we have cytoplasmic genetic, that is a cytoplasmic genetic male sterility, and the last one is chemically induced. Now we will go in detail about all these classifications one by one. Very first is genetic male sterility, that is abbreviated by GMS. In this case, obviously male sterility is governed by genetic factor. Here male sterility is governed by genotype, that means by gene, but that gene is a kind of recessive gene. Recessive gene that is said to be MS. Again, listen carefully here. The male sterility is governed by a genetic character. Here the male sterility is governed by the genetic character, and the genetic character is recessive in the nature, but sometimes dominant genes are also present that governs the male sterility. For example, in case of safflower. Male sterility is widely occurring in the plants and in a given plant species where several different MS gene act monogenetically, and then they are resulting into the production of male sterility. For example, different 70 kinds of MS genes are reported in maize. 64 kinds of different MS genes are reported in tomato, 57 in barley, 54 in pea, and 25 in rice. And these all genes are arising either spontaneously or either they are either So in the male sterility, I was discussing like these MS alleles are either arising spontaneously or either these are the result of treatment with chemical and physical mutagens. Next is the types of male genetic male sterility, that is GMS. One category is that is they are insensitive to the environment, and other categories on the basis that is they are sensitive to the environment. If it is sensitive to the environment, then it is said to be sensitive genetic male sterility. And if it is sensitive to the photoperiod, then it is said to be photoperiod genetic sensitive genetic male sterility. And if it is the third one is transgenic male sterility. This is about cytoplasmic male sterility. And this cytoplasmic male sterility is the result of mutations that take place in the mitochondrial genome, and as a result, we are no more having the presence of male pollen grains. And this male sterility is responsible for giving rise to unfavorable mitochondrial interactions. It is utilized in the production of a hybrid seed production, and also in case of hybrid seed production in case of chilies by certain private companies. Then we have cytoplasmic genetic male sterility. This is the case in which a nuclear gene that restores the fertility is also known. It is abbreviated as C, that stands for cytoplasmic, G for genetic, and male sterility. And chemically induced means here chemicals are induced so that there is no more the presence of functional male part, that is the pollen grains. And the chemicals that are utilized for inducing male sterility is said to be gametocides. These are the examples of gametocide: naphthalene acetic acid, then gibberellins. So this was all about today's lecture, that is self-incompatibility and male sterility. So if you people have any doubt, we can discuss, and you can text me. Whatever mode of communication you find that is easy to communicate, you can let me know about your discrepancy through that particular mode. So thank you. This was all about from my side.